This morning, let's begin where Matthew invites us to begin, on the mountain. Here we are in the 17th chapter of the Gospel, and Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain by themselves. This shouldn't be surprising, and many times during his ministry, Jesus retreated up into the mountains to pray, to escape from the needs of the crowds and find some time to himself. But this time, in a moment that resists any sort of easy description, his appearance is altered before the disciples. His face shines out like the sun, his clothing becomes dazzlingly white, and Moses and Elijah appear, speaking with him, though we don't know what they were talking about. It is an unveiling, a revelation, not the creation of something new, but an opportunity in which the truth of the situation is made abundantly clear in a powerful way. The veil between heaven and earth has grown thin in this place, and the disciples catch a glimpse of what had previously been concealed in the day-to-day humdrum of their life together. This rabbi, this teacher, this man who they had walked with, who they had talked with, who they'd eaten with, who they'd slept beside, this man is revealed to be, in fact, God's beloved Son. And Peter responds in a way that is neither foolish nor malicious. He says, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings, one each for Jesus and Moses and Elijah." His instinct here is one of preservation, part of an overall impulse toward institutionalism, one might say. He recognizes the absolute significance of the moment, and he wishes to safeguard it, to stabilize it, to enshrine it, perhaps even to worship it. If such a similar revelation were to occur here, would we not also be tempted towards a similar response? It's not a sinful instinct. It is, in many ways, it is precisely the definition of a religious response. But while Peter is still speaking, the cloud interrupts him. The cloud speaks, and the voice from heaven does not commend his intended construction project. Instead, it stops him and redirects his attention entirely, saying, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." And here, Jesus' baptism is being invoked, of course, when the heavens had split open and the Holy Spirit descended upon him. "This is my Son, with whom I am well pleased." But the command here is not to build something. It's also not a command to remain or stay. It's not a command to try to recreate the conditions of this revelation, this appearance of glory over and over and over again. The command is simple: listen to him. And I think implied there also, follow him. And so almost immediately after this command, this statement, the moment passes and the light fades and Moses and Elijah disappear. The disciples fall on their face in fear, and yet Jesus touches them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid," almost as if to say, "Come on, folks, we've got work to do." And so they all rise and they descend the mountain. It is that final movement, so easily overlooked, that deserves our sustained attention this morning. While the signs and wonders are so remarkable, they grab all the attention, the conclusion of the story is that they do, in fact, go back down. They descend. That moment of the Transfiguration does not conclude the narrative. It is not the peak of the plot, but rather just a moment of respite and clarity intended to propel the story forward towards its true climax. So speaking of that larger story, we should notice where this episode is situated in Matthew's Gospel. It follows immediately upon Jesus' first clear prediction of his suffering and death. And this glorious revelation does not interrupt that trajectory. It simply clarifies it. Who is it that will suffer? The one who will be rejected, handed over, and crucified is not merely a misunderstood teacher or a failed revolutionary or a zealot. No, he is God's beloved Son, and there must be no confusion about that reality if this grand story is to move forward. This mountaintop moment does not cancel out the coming crucifixion. Rather, it provides the critical framing necessary for us to understand the magnitude of what is about to happen. Crucially, despite knowing what he is about to endure, Jesus himself does not remain. He does not stay within this unveiled brightness. If brilliance and comfort and revelation were the ultimate goal, he might well have stayed. If the purpose of this divine self-disclosure were simply to produce awe, then the mountain would be the destination and we'd all be making pilgrimages there today. But the fullness of the gospel will not permit that conclusion. That is not the end of the story. So it is that immediately upon their descent, Jesus and the disciples, they encounter failure and confusion and human suffering, and they heal a boy. It would seem here in the story that the glory of God is revealed not in order to isolate itself, remove itself from the brokenness of the world, but in order to enter into the reality of our difficult lives in an ever more decisive manner. To put it otherwise, if Christ had chosen permanent residence on that mountaintop, in one of those dwellings that Peter wanted to create, there'd be no arrest, no Jerusalem, no trial before Pilate, no cross. But there would also be no resurrection. This moment of revelation, if it had remained suspended in that moment, if they had remained on that mountaintop without descending into the world's suffering, then this story wouldn't end in redemption. Now, for us this morning, I think it raises an unavoidable question about the nature and purpose of worship itself. What do we imagine we are doing here, right now, when we gather before God as a congregation of the faithful? Is our primary aim just to experience wonder, or to recover a sense of transcendence, or be reassured that the divine remains near to us? Is it simply to lift up our prayers and seek petition for our pain and grievance? Those are important things. They're not trivial goods. Awe, I'm not saying we should dismiss that. Gratitude certainly is incredibly important. We seek spiritual vitality. We seek the support of one another as a community. But if worship becomes an end in itself, if what we're really seeking is just the preservation of a particular emotional tone or musical style, or we're remembering back to this moment, we remember back to this moment, perhaps when all the pews were filled, when society and culture looked differently outside, when the people of faith had more of a prominent position in our culture. If that's why we worship, then we may be confusing the mountaintop for the mission. It may be that Peter's instinct to build these dwellings is not foreign to us at all. Rather, every generation of the church is tempted to identify a moment in its past that feels uniquely authentic, uniquely faithful, uniquely alive, and then we measure the present experience against that preserved image. The difficulty is that the Scriptures do not describe faith in that static way. Rather, they describe it as fundamentally transformative. Faith is fundamentally transformative. You may recall from the Hebrew Bible, Abraham becomes Abraham. His name is completely changed. Jacob becomes Israel. The people move from different geography to different geography. There's constant change. In the New Testament, these disciples themselves that we're talking about, they're fishermen who are en route to becoming apostles. And later on, we even hear about a persecutor of the church becoming its foremost preacher and spreading the gospel throughout the Mediterranean world. The testimony of the Scriptures are that the people of God are absolutely not called to freeze. We're not called to just try to preserve a single powerful encounter with God. But instead, as people of faith, we are to be continually conformed, continually transformed into the purposes that God has for us as history continues to unfold. And this transformation, by its very nature, requires movement. It requires action. It necessitates change. It's unavoidable. Now, in a few moments, we will, or at least I will invite you to enact a practice drawn from the ancient observance of the Feast of the Transfiguration from the Orthodox tradition. If you're familiar with that, they actually observe a different calendar than we do, and they don't celebrate the Transfiguration until August, when the seasons are a little bit different. But I thought it would be interesting and fitting for us to learn from our brothers and sisters of another tradition. But we will enact a practice known as a blessing of the grapes, or the blessing of the first fruits of the vine. It's an offering that is an acknowledgement that everything that we receive is a gift. The earth yields its abundance not as the result of our control and of our effort, but as the consequence of grace. Everything comes from God. And you'll see, I hope, that this particular variety of grape, it's called a candy cane grape, or a cotton candy grape. Let me make sure I'm correct about this. This grape is strikingly sweet. They are so sweet, you can smell the sugar. I can smell it from here. Their flavor is almost extravagant. And just like that mountaintop, there's nothing wrong with delighting in the sweetness, in the sugary moments, in the exciting, tasty moments. The goodness of creation is not a distraction from faith by any means. Yet in this liturgical space, these grapes won't fulfill their true vocation by remaining as they are, for however tasty and wonderful they may be. In the tradition, they would be gathered and pressed and left to ferment and transformed into wine. And all that sweetness, all that sugar is precisely what will be converted through that process of fermentation. And the image there, even though we good Methodists don't use wine in our communion, we use grape juice, but in the sacramental imagination of the church, in our sacramental life together, wine is the lifeblood, the sign of the covenant, the sign of sacrifice, of communion in the blood of Christ. That's what we declare every time we celebrate communion. We lift, I lift the cup. This is my blood of the new covenant, shed for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. But it's not possible to have this sacramental element without the transformation, without the change, without the conversion of the sweetness of the grapes into this new substance. So the movement from fruit to wine to sacrament, it's not incidental, it's deeply theological, and it reminds us that what is most beautiful and sweet in our lives is not given merely for preservation, but for offering, to be given back, not to contain it, to enshrine it, to worship it. That will bring all sorts of psychological harm. The mountain is sweet, our worship is luminous, but the Christian life, our true purpose, it does not culminate in just staying in that glow of revelation. It finds its fulfillment in service to the gospel, to going back down the mountain and meeting a suffering world where it is. So as we stand on the threshold of Lent, with Ash Wednesday coming right up, this trajectory of descent, not just down the mountain, but down into the humility of foot washing, down into the humility of crucifixion, that trajectory becomes impossible to ignore. And I'm not inviting us to despise joy. In fact, I'm going to pass out the grapes so you can taste how amazing they are. Right? But I do invite us to recognize that all these wonderful things, all of these holy gifts, are given and ordered towards something greater than simply our comfort. If Christ had chosen comfort, if Christ had chosen to remain there on the mountaintop, then this great redemption story would not have been realized. And so too, if we choose only a faith that is comfortable, one that doesn't unsettle us, then we should not be surprised if our discipleship remains untested and our witness to the world remains untransformational to not only ourselves but others. The fundamental question this morning is whether we're willing in the present to follow the beloved Son down the mountain, out of the comfort and the glory and the revelation, but down the mountain into the complexity of our own time, into the daily work of reconciliation, of being peacemakers, leading lives of costly love, to participate, metaphorically at least, in the slow and uncomfortable process by which these grapes become wine and disciples become apostles. Again, the voice from the cloud does not ask us to simply reconstruct the mountain or enshrine it or to build great dwelling places for God to inhabit. But rather we are called to listen and to follow Jesus out. So as we prepare to enter Lent, may we receive the sweetness of God's gifts with gratitude, even as we surrender ourselves to the transforming work of the one who chose to descend so that we all might be saved. May it be so. Amen.